Good afternoon. This is Professor Amin Al-Din on Muslim Network TV with the program Critical Talk. And if you didn't see it yesterday, please tune in to yesterday's program, which was Quick Eats Pakistan. Today, I decided to take us further even into arts and culture with looking at something we rarely talk about, but all of us have come to enjoy, especially during this pandemic, which is the movie, the video game, the book that has been sitting on our shelves that we keep swearing we're going to read but haven't read. So this afternoon, I have with me an extraordinary man, and I'm proud to say a good friend of mine, Kamran Pasha. Kamran Pasha is an American Hollywood screenwriter, director, and novelist of Pakistani origin. He was a writer and producer on the NBC series Kings, after working as a producer on NBC's Bionic Woman. Previously, he was a co-producer and writer of Sleeper Cell. Um, there's just so much here, but I want to give it to everybody because oftentimes I don't think we plumb all the things that we can actually do and take our skills and hone them and use them. He's written for a number of programs, but I want to give you a scope. He was hired to rewrite a movie screenplay entitled The Immaculate for Sydney Kimmel Entertainment and producer, and I don't know if you know these names, but it's important. Um, he sold his first two novels to Simon Schuster, and I'm going to highly, highly, highly recommend Mother of the Believers, which is my favorite book of all time, which is about the Prophet Muhammad's wife, Aisha. And it's one of the very few full length fiction treatments that even preteens and teens, along with adults, can enjoy. He also has another fiction text, Shadow of the Swords, a love story. I love love stories, set amidst the showdown of Richard the Lionheart and Saladin during the Third Crusade. Get that one too. But the talents and the reach don't stop there. He made his first video game for the hip hop artist 50 Cent. The game, 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, sounds terrible, game is great, is something you ought to look at. There's also a video called Tron Uprising, which is on Disney Plus. I'm doing these accolades because I want the audience to understand that there is a not well mined field of stuff out there for us to participate in. Now, this is an attorney who I guess the law made him, ticked him off a little bit, but who is a graduate of Dartmouth, who then attended an MFA, Master in Fine Arts, for those of you who don't know, producers program in UCLA's School of Theater and Film and Television. And I want especially the young people listening, to see how you can stack up what you need to move forward. Now, while we've done that, but he wrote a screen adaptation of the Japanese anime Kite. I want you to go and look up some of these things as I take him through a bunch of goodies for us today, and all of which are extremely important. So, Cameron, how are you?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm well, and I'm honored. I'm humbled by the introduction. So thank you so much.
No, but one of the things that always happens is with the renown among us, we shorten their bio to a sentence instead of really giving people the credit that they should have all the time. So, Let me. Oh God, you went to law school. You know, I flunked out of law. Well, didn't quite flunk out. I just gave up after 2 years.
You were very wise. I went to the entire degree and I don't do it anymore.
But tell me a little bit about your life as a writer first.
Sure. Well, I think I was always a writer. In fact, I think people are they know what they're supposed to do with their lives when they're 6 years old. I really believe that. And then later, their parents or their uncle and auntie or the school, someone tells them it's not possible. I remember when I was a little child, and I was about 6 years old. I was watching a TV show. The people watching this won't remember it, but you'll remember it. It was an old TV comedy called Three's Company. Remember that comedy? And it was
I do. Stop dating me.
yeah. So I was a child. I watched it,
Uh,
and we had just immigrated from Pakistan a little bit before. I'd learned how to speak English, and I was watching it, and it was a bit of a risque show. But as little children, you don't get all the jokes, and so we're watching it. I was watching with my older sister, and I was 6 years old, and I remember this vividly. I turned to my sister as watching the TV show, and I turned to her and said, "I'm going to do this someday. I'm going to go to Hollywood, and I'm going to make TV shows and movies." Right? And my sister, God bless her, she said, "Oh, we can't do that. Muslim people aren't allowed into that. There's no Muslim people doing things like that, so we don't have
right.
that." And she must have been 8 years old. I was six, right? And I never forgot that because that's what happens to a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people watching right now, you know, uh, have been told their dream is impossible at a young age, and then they gave it up. But
Right.
I believe Allah gives us all a talent that we were made for, and as children we know what that is. And then later, life tells us it's not possible, so we don't even try. So I was always a writer. Even in fifth grade, I wrote my first short story, a murder mystery, which I got published in this little school newspaper. But I never thought about doing it professionally. And
Yeah.
I went through all this long journey. Went to college. I worked as a journalist. I was writing. On a certain level, I was writing professional, but not the creative writing that I wanted to do.
But let me back you up.
Yes,
Let me get inside your head.
yes.
How does one be even? I mean, do stories just come? Do they, are they little bits and pieces and then they come together?
I mean, I can only speak from my own experience. Every writer is different. Every artist is different. For me, everything comes in a full package in a flash. Literally, it comes out of nowhere. I can't explain. Often it comes when I'm in the shower. It's usually when you're private and alone, and I will see the entire thing, beginning, middle, and end instantly. And then the process is translating that image in your head into words, right? Which takes
Um,
time, which
yeah.
which is the actual process, and it's never quite as exactly as perfect as the thing you saw in your head. But that's how it comes to me. Whenever an idea comes for a movie or TV or a book, it literally I can see the beginning and the ending of it instantly. And
Well,
so,
let's take for an example,
mhm,
Mother of the Believers, my absolute all-time favorite, because in the Muslim community, our young people have nothing.
yes,
There's not I remember buying for my youngest kid the Babysitters Club. 87 books. I was so tired of the Babysitters Club, I was going to jump out the window. But there was no corollary. When we talk about the wives of the prophet, may Allah be pleased with him, or any of the other luminaries, be they male or female, it's a paragraph at best.
well, we've been
Mother, how
disconnected
did
from
you,
our history.
huh?
We've been disconnected from our history. We don't even know our history
Right.
anymore.
But Mother, if you would just set my audience up for Mother of the Believers, because I want everybody to get on Amazon and buy this book.
It's right here. This is what it looks like. That's the cover.
Yeah, yeah,
That's my name. There we go. Cover. Yeah,
is the book.
that's the book.
Set us up for Mothers of the Believers. How did you decide from which position? How did you become the woman in the book?
Well, like I said, everything I'm doing is stuff that I've wanted to do since I was a child. So I've been thinking about doing something about Aisha radiallahu anha, may God be pleased with her, since I was a little kid. When I first read about her, in Islamic school texts, or when I was a little child, I said, this woman is amazing because in one person, she single-handedly shattered all the stereotypes. Even then, as a kid, I was getting Muslim women
Right,
are weak, they're oppressed, they're subservient,
right,
and she shatters all those stereotypes because she's this powerful woman, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was very close to her, and she had no problem talking back to him. She had no problem arguing with him, and he loved that about her. He loved that she was a feisty spirit, and she was a political leader after his death, and she made mistakes. She's human. What fascinating about her is that she wasn't a saint. She was a religious person, but she made mistakes, and she learned from those mistakes. Some of those mistakes were pretty big, and so I'm always interested in her because she symbolized to me the Muslim community with all of its beauty and all of its flaws. And the very fact that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, when he's dying, he said, everybody else out of the room, I just want to be with her. And he dies in her arms. This person who's this profound, complex, flawed human being, he chooses to be with her. It's because to me, she represented the whole ummah. The whole Islamic ummah is represented by her in all her complexity. And so I always wanted to tell that story. And then when I was offered a chance to do so through my publisher, Simon and Schuster, I had to make a choice. And when you're asking how it, literally I said, when I was actually, okay, now you got to write this book. Someone's actually paying you to write this book.
Mm.
I said, okay, Allah, I don't know what to do now. I've been thinking about this for 30 years, whatever. Now I got to actually do it, right? And then suddenly what happens is I thought the beginning and the end. And so actually the very first words that I wrote of the novel are the final words.
Yeah.
It's the very final words. I mean, the novel starts with a question and ends with the answer to the question. I won't give the answer, but the question is, what is faith? I saw that. I literally saw her asking, what is faith? What is Iman? What does faith mean? And then that's the first line of the book. And then the final line of the book is the answer. I literally, before I wrote anything else, I wrote the answer to the question. And so when you get to the end of the book, you'll find out her answer to what faith is.
But how do you get, I mean, some of the scenes when I got this book, of course, my husband and I bought copies for everybody in the family. Um, how does dialogue come? How does the the I was there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I was there in the scenery, and even though books don't have music, I had music. I was there.
Well,
How does all of that come?
Well, thank you for saying that. I again speaking from who I am and who I am, I felt like I channeled that book, like something was taking me over and
Okay.
writing it. And so I for me, it was like watching. It's true for all of my work, whether it's a screenplay or it's a novel. It's like I'm watching the movie. I'm watching the movie on screen, and I'm just transcribing it. I sit there in front of the screen, and I'm like every artist. I'm scared. I'm looking at that blank screen. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have an answer. And then my fingers start moving, and the images start coming, and I don't know where they're coming from. It's not like I'm thinking like, what would Aisha say in this thing? I'm sitting there, and I'm suddenly seeing her standing there with this person, and I'm just transcribing the words because her character is just talking. She's saying the words. And a lot of it, I base a lot of it on Islamic history. So I had the benefit of having her own words a lot of the time because we have so much of her biography that
Okay,
we have.
well then that's an important point. How
Mhm.
does the writer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, get the research done?
Well, I mean that's the pivotal thing. It's about hopefully you care enough about the subject matter to get it done. And for this, because I knew how important this topic would be, I had been studying early Islamic history just out of personal interest for years. And
Mm,
so when the moment came, I literally just had to go to my memory and said, okay, what was that incident with Aisha and the camel? Okay, I have like 4 books on that already. And I
mm,
would pull those out and I pull out her comments on it and whatever and use them. I think it's absolutely pivotal, even if you're not writing a historical story, to research your thing to make it accurate. And inevitably, no matter what you do, you're not going to be an expert on everything. So I always get somebody who writes me, in this obscure book of Islamic history, it said that the house had 3 windows, not 2, and you only described 2. So you obviously didn't do your research. There's always going to be somebody who knows something more than you do and is angry that you didn't present it their way.
they didn't
Or
write a
someone
book.
didn't go that way based on this thing they read. You do your best, but the pivotal thing is to have the intention of getting the information, but also because I'm writing historical fiction, as I say in as I say in the author's note to my novel at the beginning, this is not an Islamic history. This is a novel. This is a work of fiction. I reference all the Islamic Sira sources, history sources people should read. And the great thing is on Amazon, I can tell what people are buying after they buy my book. And they tend to buy those Islamic histories that are mentioned in
Right,
that. So
right.
the people are reading them.
Because I
So
did.
that's
I
attention.
did. I
And
went straight to them. I am, the feminist movement and all these other movements. that I can't say I know a whole bunch about.
Mhm.
One of the things that kind of came up that gets a lot of flack is men. I forgot the name of the group. Men trying to be feminists or something like that.
Yeah, the male feminists, which
Right,
in my
but
experience are really fraudulent people. So
yeah, but this is not what's happening here. What's happening here is an actual channeling of a woman by a male.
the greatest compliment I've gotten, and I've gotten it pretty regularly. I actually got it. I wrote this book over 10 years ago, and a
Right.
woman emailed me, non-Muslim woman who had read the novel, emailed me through my website and said this comment again just a few weeks ago. She said, "I did not realize a man wrote this book until I got to the end of the book and I saw your picture on like the back cover, and I was
Right.
like, it's a guy."
Yeah,
Because she
yeah,
said I authentically done a female voice, and again, I have to, whatever good I've done, and I say that in my author's note, whatever good is in this book is from a lie, I didn't do it right, and whatever is flawed is my own human error in trying to translate
right.
it. But definitely, it was fascinating for me because you know me, you know me, Professor. You know that I'm not necessarily a very sensitive guy. I'm definitely not a very feminine guy, and so to be able
No,
to channel, I'm a pretty
that's what I'm
masculine guy,
saying.
to channel a woman's perspective and to have women say, "I thought a woman wrote this," I'm like, all right, then here we go.
I mean,
I'm still not a sensitive guy.
the dialogue in there is so dynamic that the reader, future readers, and ones that have already read will feel as though they're a part of the conversation. The descriptors and the background. I'm in the carriage. I'm in the house. I'm here. I'm there. I'm looking at the interactions between the wives of the prophet, saying, "Yeah, and I would have done that," and "Yeah, I would have said that." So I am so enamored of this book. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim or not.
Mhm.
It is a wonderful text of fiction. And then the other thing, before I go on to my other questions and we take a little break, is how does one encourage those budding writers out there that are listening to us today to understand that young people, preteens, male and female, and teens need their own genre of literature? How do I move to encourage that? And we'll talk about our screenwriters program later, but somebody has got to also be hearing stories. I mean, the kids have no moral guidance.
Yeah.
They can't latch on to adult moral guidance. You know, everything. I mean, how do you teach how to be a discerning human being? Well, you do it through stories, but we don't have writers.
Well, I want to say this one thing, and if we need to go to break, we'll go to break. But the one thing I'll say is, a spiritual teacher, a Sufi sheikh, once said to me, "Allah gives every ummah the miracle that it reflects, its values." And so Musa alayhi salam, Moses, was given magic. The Pharaoh believed in magic, so he was given all the staff would turn to a snake and the water would open. So that was seen as greater magic than they had. And
Mm,
Jesus, peace be upon him, lived in a time when healing and the medical sciences of the Roman Empire were the highest thing they're impressed by. And Jesus, peace be upon him, say, "Oh, you're impressed by your medicine? Look, God can give sight to the blind person. He can raise the dead. You can't do that with your medicine."
right,
And so, but then what is the gift of Islam? It is in the form of poetry. The Holy Quran comes as the most
right,
incredible
right.
Arabic poetry. It's a form of art. And it says, the Arabs had nothing to be proud of. They were a Bedouin, nomadic people, pretty primitive, but they were
Mhm.
proud of their art. They were proud of their poetic art. And then the Quran comes from a man through a man who's never made any art in his whole life, never made any poetry. Suddenly, the best poetry ever in the Arabic language, which
Springs
to this day cannot be repeated 14 centuries later. So the miracle that Allah gives us is art, is the Quran, and that's the miracle of our ummah, is that He gave us the message through art.
So we need to get on with our gift. This is Professor Amina Aldine. I'm getting ready to have a ball. Well, I'm already having a ball with Kamran Pasha, our screenwriter extraordinaire. This is Muslim Network TV, and you're watching Critical Talk. We'll be right back.
popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me!
No justice!
No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward. That lesson learned brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is Professor Aman Al-Din, and I'm having a blast with Kamran Pasha, screenwriter, fiction writer, attorney, a whole bunches of stuff I said at the beginning of the show extraordinaire on Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk. I would like to now go to the other book, which is sitting on my shelf. And I just have to say this. The German edition of Mother of the Believers is very interesting. I read it too.
You read it in German. It was very popular in Germany, apparently.
It was. And I could see why it was popular because it holds true to the English version. But anyway, let's go to Swords and the Crusades. We don't know diddly about the Crusades, even though many Christians are still fighting them. So tell us about that book, Sword of Shadows.
So this here it goes. It's Shadow of the Swords.
I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Shadow of the Swords.
And this was actually the first book I published. The first book I wrote. I wrote this novel based on a screenplay I wrote right after September 11th, where I wanted to tell the story of another time when there was an extremist terrorist attack. But this time the world is different. It's the Muslims are the heroic leaders of civilization led by Salahuddin Ayyubi. And the Europeans were the violent terrorists killing women and children, and Jews and Muslims were allied to try to defeat this invasion. So I said, I want to show another world because the enemy is not Muslims or Christians. The enemy is fanaticism, right? Which was the theme of that book. And, we've had many books and we've had many movies, about the Crusades, Hollywood movies, but they're always from the Christian point of view. And Richard the Lionheart is always shown as this great hero, in the Robin Hood legend. He's this great hero. But, he was a bad guy, and he was a bad guy by the Europeans' accounts. He was over the moment the crusade was over. He was imprisoned by his own soldiers in Germany. When they went back, the first thing they did was, let's get rid of this guy who put us through this horrific crusade, and they locked him up in Germany. And they said, "We'll see you later, sucker," and they took off. And so he was hated by his own men. So how does he become this great heroic figure? He was killing women and children left and right. This is how the Crusaders recorded. This guy was a brutal barbarian. And the Crusaders recorded that Salahuddin was this honorable man who made them feel ashamed to fight the Muslims. Right. Because he was an honorable, ethical person, and their own leader was so barbaric. So I said, that's the historical story told by the Crusaders, not just the Muslims. So why is that story never told? And so I decided to tell the story of Salahuddin versus Richard the Lionheart, from the Islamic sources and from the Crusader sources that have been ignored. And so that book was and this is for your readers as well. I wrote the screenplay in 2002 after September 11th. I couldn't get anyone to make the movie or get interested. I got a lot of interest, but no one wanted to make the movie. It was too scary to make a movie with a Muslim hero and Richard Lionheart as the villain. So I then decided to turn it into a novel, and I finished that novel in 2003, a year later. And then I spent 4 years being rejected by major publishers. 4 years. I went through, I would go to conferences and I would submit my book. I would meet literary agents and no one wanted it. And then when Allah willed it, 2007, I got to a literary agent who believed in the book. She actually, the German book you're talking about, she actually said, I think the Germans are interested in the Crusade. So she sent the novel first to the German publishers who bought it. And when news got out that the Germans had paid a lot of money for this book, then Simon & Schuster
decided, I want it.
They wanted it, and then they met me and they said, we want to give you a 2-book deal. You're a very interesting new voice, and what other ideas do you have? So I said, well, I've always wanted to do this novel on Aisha. They're like, oh, that's so interesting. Let's put that out first. I said, but I haven't written it. And they said, well, you got basically
Hurry up.
9 months. Go. You have 9 months. Here's a check. Go
Uh-huh.
write this entire novel. And so I had to create that novel. So the second novel was Mother of the Believers, and it was put out first. And then a year later, Shadow of the Swords about the Crusades.
Well, it's very interesting in attempts by those in power
Mhm.
to rewrite history.
Sure.
And if we don't have thinkers who can come along and put history right, then we believe the version that's running around. Because in the Robin Hood series, Richard the Lionheart is this sympathetic.
Mhm.
He is the bomb, dude. He's gonna be good. He's willing to give his life and this and that. And then Salahuddin is somewhere off in the background. I saw one kind of Turkish version
Mhm.
that has been out since the pandemic, and it's too quirky for me. But that's the closest that I've seen to telling the actual story.
Yeah.
So I think readers out there and non-readers too. These are two books, and if you would hold both of them up one more time.
Sure. This is Mother of the Believers, my novel on Aisha. May God be pleased with her. It's one. And then here's my novel on Salahuddin and the Crusades, Shadow of the Swords. So they're both available through Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, all of that.
Now, before I go to your other major endeavors, I want to talk about what are you working on now in the book realm.
Well, I actually have finished my third novel. The manuscript has been submitted to my literary agent. It's right now, because of the current environment that we're in, it's very hard to get things published.
Right.
Publishing is going through chaos because of the events that are happening, just as everything else is. But
Right.
I'm hoping to have it published. It's my third novel, and it's actually interesting because it's pre-Islamic. It's actually based on a biblical story. It's the biblical tale of Esther, which most Muslims are not familiar with because there's no variant of it in the Quran. But Esther is in a book in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, about a Jewish woman in ancient Iran. We're talking about like 5th century BC, ancient Iran, who ends up becoming the queen of Persia. And she saves her people from this pogrom of a villainous guy, this villainous vizier, who wants to kill off all the Jews of Iran. And that's a very influential book in Judaism and Christianity. And I wrote that book because I wanted to, again, the new challenge is I wanted to not just tell the story from a woman's point of view. I wanted to tell the story from a Jewish woman's point of view, which is not who I am, right?
Yeah.
And also at this current moment in history, when many of our Jewish friends feel very threatened by Iran because of the politics of Iran and Israel in the Middle East, and I wanted to tell a story. Look, this story is from Iran, where Jewish people were living in Iran prior to Islam, 1,000 years before Islam. Jewish people live in Iran, and here's a story of a Jewish heroine who's Iranian Jewish. And so maybe here's a story that can build some bridges between these two communities that are right now maybe a little bit at odds.
Yeah. But it's also, in addition, told by a Muslim who can move across, because we don't only have to tell the Muslim story.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And we get obsessed with that. We lock ourselves into a box.
No, we don't need to be in a bubble. I'm going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, I'm going to switch over to screenplays and videos. This is Professor Amin Al-Din with extraordinary Kamran Pasha. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adams World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
This is Professor Amin Al-Din with Kamran Pasha, Muslim Network TV, and Critical Talk, and we're telling stories. And we might be even making up some stories in the future by the time we get to the end of this, because I am so inspired. I haven't had a full thought come to me in 100 years, but there we go. Now, I'm going to play the illiterate, and I'm only slightly literate because of you. When I think of writing fiction, that's one category for me. When I think of screenplays, screenwriting, and I had the wonderful honor, well, I should say DePaul had the honor. Cameron came in a number of years ago and worked with some Muslim high school students on screenwriting for us. And it was just, I sat there, mouth open, taking notes furiously. How does one get from thoughts about a story to actual screenwriting? And then this, you can talk about what you're doing in our screenwriting workshop.
Well, you've hit the pivotal issue, which is that, often we have a lot of ideas and images in our head for a story, but a story is a story. It flows. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And goes back to the rules of storytelling are almost psychological. They're embedded into us. Aristotle, El Hakim in the Islamic tradition, Aristotle wrote the first book on storytelling called On Poetics, which you can still get translated on Amazon.com. It's still a great book. He established a 3-act structure, which is the beginning, middle, and end, because that's how we see our lives. We see our lives as a beginning, middle, and end. So we tell stories that way. And so the way to make any story, whether it's a screenplay or a novel work, is I teach story structure, because my philosophy is that you need to understand story structure in order to actually tell a compelling story. There's a lot of writers out there, especially in novels, that just meander and they go this way and that way. It's all beautiful. And and some of them are very successful, and some people like that. For me, when I get to a book that's just wandering around, and to me that's just a writer who doesn't want to tell a story but just wants to hear himself speak or herself speak. And that's not interesting to me. The hard part is actually doing Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, which is what I learned to do when I first learned screenwriting. I got a book on screenwriting structure, and I followed it. And that is what I teach now, and that's what I've been teaching in or starting to teach in our lovely class that we're doing, with some of the students, I believe, in Chicago. And we just had our first class with that. But I just introduced them first. I wanted to get them into the world of taking stories they already knew, like a movie or a video game, and then say, okay, like some people chose, Black Panther because they love that movie. Some of the kids said, okay, well, you know who Black Panther is, you know who his enemy is. So why don't we, you know the movie. So why don't we take those two characters and you come up with a different story? And one of them said, what if I put those two characters, Black Panther and and his enemy, and put them in a bank heist? Black Panther's trying to stop him from robbing a bank. I said, great, that's a movie. That's a movie right there. That's a story right there. So now we're going to develop that further. And so now in the next class, I'm going to start teaching them beginning, middle, and end. Now that they've got their characters and their setting, now we got to give it a journey.
That is just so awesome. So you're taking a piece of fiction, or it could be real life, and you're saying, what is the monologue or whatever I want to do about this with my beginning, middle, and end? I watched on Netflix, they have, what is his name? The Black playwright. They have a series on, he has a competition, a monologue kind of competition, August Wilson. And I'm saying, oh my goodness, many kids could do this. Some will be successful, some won't, but they will build character. They will learn the art of presentation. All of those things are coming out, but it's that story and moving it from the story, which you're going to write page after page after page, to a screenplay. You've done a number of screenplays. How does one do that?
Well, again, it's if I know the story that I want to tell, like I want to tell a story about the Crusades, so I think of it, and I specifically want to tell the story of Saladin versus Richard the Lionheart. So even in that, I mean, I'm not just making it up. I know history, I know what happened, but I still have to think in terms of, well, what's the beginning, what's the middle, and what's the end of that story, right? And so even then, I have to compress the historical events into a framework, and that's how you do it. And in some ways, it's even more challenging with history because you've been given these are the alleged facts of what, you know, these are the story, the account that you've been given as to what happened, and you've got to now make it work within a structure of a beginning, middle, and end. And the pivotal thing that help you figure that out is idea of character journey, which is your character starts off as this kind of person at the beginning of the story and learns a lesson, and it becomes a different kind of person at the end of the story. So, for example, in the Saladin story, Richard the Lionheart starts off as a brutal, anti-Muslim, villainous guy full of a lot of hatred and anger, and a lot of it is actually, you see, comes from his resentment towards his father.
Right.
And it's just projection of his family problems onto other people, which is what happens. And then over the course of the novel, where he's finally confronting Saladin and the Muslims aren't what he thought they were, he's not a good guy at the end, but he's a guy who's come to understand maybe my understanding of Christianity is wrong. Maybe Jesus doesn't want me to do these things. And that's his growth. And for Saladin, and because Saladin especially has been very lionized in Muslim history and in Crusader history, he's been viewed as almost a perfect person who never makes mistakes, right? And so his journey, which is more subtle, but it's very much there, which is he starts off as a man very confident in his destiny. You know, God has used him to reconquer Jerusalem after 100 years from Crusaders. It's like the force of destiny is on him, right? And then you discover over the course of the book, especially near the end of the book, you discover he's overwhelmed by this. He's overwhelmed by everyone's expectations. Everyone has put him on the pedestal. It's too much. You know, he's scared. Well, he can make a mistake, and if he makes a mistake, all these people are going to die. And everyone put him on a pedestal of being perfect, and he's not. He's a human being, and he makes mistakes, and he can't let people see that he's human, or they're going to lose confidence. So his journey is coming to terms with being human.
How can human beings be perfect?
Well, in Islam, they're not. But what has happened is Muslims, especially after colonization, we have, in the same way that our Christian friends tend to have saints and idols, and they tend to, they have icons.
Idolize.
They idolize people in history, like Jesus, alayhi salam. You know, the idea that he could have had a wife is shocking to Christians. It's like, well, he's human, right? But for Muslims, that's not shocking. But now Muslims have done the same thing. We've done with our own historical figures. We put them up on pedestals because we were taught this by our Christian conquerors during the period we have to, that the Prophet, peace be upon him, can't be human with human desires and flaws. That Aisha can't be human, Saladin can't be human. And all my books are like, the earliest sources show them as human. They only show them, even the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, I need Allah's forgiveness to enter Jannah. He has to forgive me. I mean, I'm not a perfect person. And we're afraid to say that, but I was like, the earliest sources aren't afraid to say that. And so our religion has turned into something else because we allowed it to.
With your personal development, when you realize, and you learn that everybody can't be human. I mean, can't be perfect.
And we're not supposed to be. That's not interesting.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's not interesting, but it ain't.
And it's not the way God made us. If he wanted us, as it says in the Quran, God, the angels are like, why are you doing this? We're perfect. We just spin around your throne singing praises. We don't do any sins. Why are you making this thing that's going to make sin? And God says, I know what you don't know. God wanted us to be this way.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you another question before we do our last segment.
Yeah.
And that is about writing and thinking habits. You can read Walter Mosley, who says, well, I get up and I'm buck naked in front of my window and I write X amount of hours a day. Mm-hmm. And what are your writing habits?
Well, I'm going to give you the writing habit. That's the actual truth. And God bless Mr. Mosley if he does that. Most writers procrastinate and are scared to write. That includes me. Most writers procrastinate. I was given 9 months. It's not a lot of time, but I was given 9 months to write Mother of the Believers. I spent half that time procrastinating, not writing one word. And about 4 months left.
You make me feel better. I feel better.
It was due in April. And on January 1st, I had been assigned this in the summer. And January 1st comes around, I'm like, I got 4 months left of this 9 months, and I'm going to lose my first ever book deal if I don't do this. And so panic set in, and I wrote the original novel was actually longer. I wrote 900-page novel over the next 4 months, just sitting around in terror, writing for 12 hours a day. The pressure was so intense, right? And then the publisher cut out 300 pages from the novel. So I didn't even need to do that much. But there's a great book that I did not write, but actually, if you will see that he is on the cover of my novel here. This author, Stephen Pressfield, you'll see that he called my novels, he's on the blurb of both my novels, but he praises them. Stephen Pressfield actually inspired me to become a novelist. And it's a great honor of God that years later, he would then write the blurb for my novel. But he wrote a wonderful book called The War of Art, not The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but The War of Art, which is all about the inner struggle that we writers face with procrastination and artistry. The War of Art. It's a beautiful little book. It's very easy to read. It's actually, every chapter is just one page. And so chapter one is one page.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it.
And it is the biggest kick in your butt you're ever going to get, because you just read one page and suddenly you're motivated to write, because it's all about why we procrastinate. Because we're procrastinating because we're afraid, and we're afraid of being imperfect, and we're actually afraid of being good. We're afraid of all of it, right? And his point is simple. If people give into this fear and don't create, everyone loses. If the guys who designed the Taj Mahal said, I'm too afraid to become an architect and a designer, I'd rather do a more practical job than become an artist, we wouldn't have the Taj Mahal. Right. If Shakespeare said, it's too scary to write, I don't want to write. And so we wouldn't have Hamlet. We wouldn't have King Lear. And so the gift, the art is a gift for humanity. And he says, ultimately, even if your book never gets published, no one ever sees your painting, no one appreciates it. No one even likes it. Mm-hmm. What it is it's a gift back to God for creating you. If nobody else ever sees it, if nobody else even likes it, your creating is your gift back to God. Thank you for making me. Here's my gift to you.
This is Professor Amin Al-Din. I'm having a blast with Kamran Pasha. And when we come back on Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk, we're going to move into videos and anime and all of that other good stuff that I have to admit I'm just learning about. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe, and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
This is Professor Amin Al-Din with Kamran Pasha on Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk. I have had a herky-jerky journey into anime because I first thought it was crazy, but then I see the beauty. And I got a PS4 and I play games all over the place, sometimes too far into the night, and I have all my opinions. But let's start at the beginning. What are some of the platforms used to create those wonderful images, if you know them, that we see on screen? Like Bilal, the something hero, and which is a particular kind of thing, as opposed to anime, which is another different kind of more cartoonish kind of thing, as opposed to the Madden football. What platforms are people using?
Well, you've just listed them. There's a broad range, especially in animation. I worked on a TV show, an animated show, which is now on Disney Plus, called The Tron Uprising, which is based on the Tron movies, but it's a very different kind of animation. It's actually computer generated animation that was done out of Asia, I believe, out of Japan when we did it, and it's very different from when you're watching Ren and Stimpy, or you're watching the Super Friends or any of those cartoons, because it looks more like a computer game. That's the blessing of the moment we are in history right now, because there's so many different ways to visually show these things, right? I wrote a screenplay about Shahrazad and the Arabian Nights, and recently I was approached by producers who wanted to do it in a non-traditional way, using sort of the kind of technology they use in the 300, where they're actually making it look like it's animated.
But how do you? I mean, what is that technology?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's so many names for it, and I wouldn't be able to list for you all the different names, because I'm not an engineer or that. What I am is I write stories, and then the people that want to produce them in a certain format will produce them in that way. Which is the same way. I mean, that my skills to teach people how to tell a story, and then hopefully they'll find the way to, even when I did the video game for 50 Cent, the reason they approached me is they wanted to tell a story about 50 Cent going to the Muslim world and making friends and having some enemies. And I gave him that. I said, here's the story for the video game. This is the object. He's trying to get this specific thing. It's a diamond encrusted skull, because that's what 50 Cent's about. But he also has this Arab woman who helps him, and this other Muslim guy. And then, so because they were just going to do a video game, he goes and kills.
What's the name of that one? So we can get it.
It's called Blood on the Sand, and it's a popular game still. 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, and the initial idea there was like, well, 50 Cent's just going to go to the Middle East and kill a bunch of Muslim people, right? I said, I'm not interested in writing that story. If you want me to write that story, then you have to have Muslim heroes who are his allies, so it's not a killing a bunch of brown people thing. Right. And ultimately, the great thing about that was a sequel game to his first game. And the amazing reviews, people said his first game, they didn't really focus on story, because as people, 50 Cent's fans are just going to want to watch him shooting people. And that was a game they made. And then the reviews for my game were like, how did that first game that had no story at all produce the second game with a really compelling story, like you're watching a movie? Right? It's because I came in and said, you need to tell a story. So that's the thing, is whatever the platform is no one commented on the visual effects of either of those games. All the reviewers were talking about what a great story the second game had.
Yeah, but it is about the story. What happens in Tron Uprising?
Tron Uprising is set it's like a prequel to the second movie. For those who don't know it, the Tron movies are about people that go inside the computer and into a video game and discover it's a living world, and they have to find a way back out to our world. And then the video game itself is the danger. And so that was the original movie with Jeff Bridges back in the 80s, which was really advanced special effects no one had ever seen before. And then we did a sequel movie Disney did, where essentially Jeff Bridges goes back in and is lost in the game, and his son has to go in and find him. The animated show that I wrote for Disney was set just before that second movie, so you could see how the world of that video game had developed and how the villain had risen to power. It was a prequel, so you understand how Jeff Bridges gets pulled in the second time and the world he's facing and the villain of it, because you discover the villain of what you discover in the second movie is the villain is actually his computer avatar from the first movie that had been his friend. And so how did the friend become the enemy? So that was what we showed on our show.
But that's back to the format for a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right. I told the middle story. We saw the beginning in the first movie. We saw the end in the second movie. And I told the cartoon in the middle of how did that happen? Because people were wondering, how do we jump to the hero being the villain between the movies?
I think for many of the listeners, you have, in these very few minutes, opened up a whole new world. There's so many stories, especially, we had a pandemic, and a shutting of stuff down. Then we had Ramadan, and oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't do what I'm used to doing. So what do I do? Oh, do your prayers count if Juma is virtual, and a lot of interesting stuff. Then we looked up, we had Black Lives Matter and a pandemic and a pandemic. And then we looked,
we also had politicians that, in my opinion, were using those events for their own agendas, and everyone can have their own opinion of who the good and bad politicians were. I ain't gonna tell you. You have their own opinion, but they were definitely using them for their own agendas.
Yeah, and then we turned around, and then we're smack dab in the midst of a very fractious and horrible election cycle, where I mean you're just being crowded with all of these voices in your head, and then you turn around and we got an insurgency and a pandemic surge. Oh, and I left out the fact that Hajj got canceled. And so we've had this awesome series of events. How would I begin to think about, and this is my very last question, how would I begin to think about a beginning, a middle, and an end? I'm really tapping your brain here.
Well, we're going through the process right now, and everyone if you were to tell a story about the events of 2020 and 2021, you have to decide who the hero of your story is, and then who is the adversary, the villain of your story, which is what I'm teaching the kids in the class.
Right.
Come up with the hero, come up with the villain. What does the villain want? How does that conflict with what the hero wants? And then you have your story, and everyone has to decide. Again, I'm not going to tell you who you should have voted for. That's your own business. But you have to decide who the heroes and the villains of the story of the whole last year were. Were the scientists telling the truth? Were they not telling the truth? Was this politician telling the truth? Were they not telling the truth? And the person that say stay inside, were they trying to protect you? Did the person that say stay inside, were they trying to control you? You have to make a decision about the story you want to tell. And so if your story is gone a certain way, the hero has this value and the villain has the opposite value, and you have to decide what those are and then tell your story.
Well, let me say that this has been the fastest 50 minutes of my life, and I don't like for time to pass quickly. So I'm going to have you back on, and I think I'm going to throw you in there with some political science people. So, because I'm getting ready to have some serious fun.
Yeah, I don't want to get into politics. My views are often very different from other people's, and I'd rather keep it general and let everyone make their own decisions.
No. Make it a story. This is Professor Amin Al-Din, and I've spent the fastest 50 minutes on the planet with the extraordinary Kamran Pasha on Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk, and we will end today, but this is just the beginning.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum